A waitress suspected a veteran's travel bag was stolen property and immediately called the police. However, this hasty and prejudiced decision set off a shocking chain of events, leading to unforeseen consequences. What mysteries lie ahead? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow these gripping stories you won't want to miss. On a chilly morning in Portland, the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the quiet streets. Amelia Carter, a dignified veteran, stepped into Sunrise Cafe, a diner renowned for its friendly atmosphere and hearty breakfasts. Carrying an old, worn travel bag after a long flight from the East Coast, Amelia was seeking a peaceful meal before heading home. Inside the cafe, customers were chatting animatedly, the clinking of plates and calls for orders filling the air. The rich aroma of coffee mingled with the scent of toasted bread and sizzling bacon. Amelia quietly entered, her weary demeanor underscored by the calm composure of a seasoned soldier. Elizabeth, a young waitress with her hair tied up and a wary look in her eyes, was wiping down tables near the entrance when she noticed Amelia. Her gaze quickly landed on the travel bag Amelia carried. The bag's aged and slightly rugged appearance reminded Elizabeth of a past incident at the cafe. An anonymous customer had brought a similar bag, leading to a commotion when dangerous items were discovered inside. That memory resurfaced, sparking unease in Elizabeth. She paused briefly, her hands gripping her apron tightly as if to steady herself. Her eyes stayed fixed on Amelia's bag, the worry from her experience evident in her expression. Amelia seemed oblivious to Elizabeth's attention. She calmly chose a table near the window, placed her bag beside her, and sat down. Her eyes scanned the menu as she slowly ran a hand through her dark hair, streaked with a hint of silver. At that moment, she was just a woman seeking tranquility after tiring days. But, to Elizabeth, Amelia's presence was far from ordinary. What should I do? She wondered, her hands unconsciously twisting the edge of her apron. A sense of duty to protect the cafe and its patrons began to overshadow her initial confidence. Elizabeth decided to approach Amelia, partly out of curiosity and partly due to her growing unease. "Good morning," Elizabeth began, trying to keep her tone friendly, though a hint of tension lingered in her eyes. "Can I help you with anything, or are you waiting for someone?" Amelia looked up, her deep brown eyes meeting Elizabeth's nervous gaze. "No, I'm just here for breakfast," she replied, her voice calm and steady, carrying the tone of someone who had lived through much. Elizabeth forced a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze flicked back to the travel bag. "I'm sorry, but I need to ask, what's inside that bag?" Elizabeth's question made Amelia pause for a moment. The air around the table seemed to grow colder. Amelia set the menu down, her brows knitting slightly. "Just personal belongings," she said, her voice composed yet firm. Elizabeth stood silent for a beat, her unease seeming to amplify the quiet tension between them. From behind the counter, Jack, her co-worker, observed the interaction with curiosity. Feeling the need to act to ensure safety, Elizabeth took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was about to unfold. Elizabeth tried to suppress her growing unease, her eyes darting toward Jack, silently pleading for support. But Jack remained silent, his inaction only increasing the pressure she felt. Determined to dispel her nervousness, Elizabeth forced a small smile, though the hesitation in her eyes betrayed her discomfort. She took another step closer to Amelia's table, her voice attempting to sound friendly. "Apologies for bothering you," Elizabeth said, her hand unconsciously smoothing the edge of her apron. "We're just trying to ensure everything here is safe for everyone. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but could you tell me what's in your bag?" Amelia slowly looked up, her gaze calm yet piercing. Just personal items, she replied, her tone steady, though she could sense the tension building in the air. Elizabeth felt the pressure intensify under Amelia's sharp, composed gaze. She reminded herself she was doing her job, yet a faint sense of doubt began to creep in. Amelia held Elizabeth's gaze, a flicker of disappointment flashing in her eyes, though her voice remained measured. "Those incidents have nothing to do with me," she said. "I just want to have a quiet breakfast. If you have a specific reason to suspect me, then say it outright." Amelia's calm but firm demeanor only added to Elizabeth's stress. She wondered if she was making the right call, but the thought of Mason, the cafe manager, and his expectations overpowered her uncertainty. Mason had reprimanded her before for not acting promptly when a suspicious customer had been present. "I understand," Elizabeth replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But this is protocol. If you can't show me what's in your bag, I'll have to ask you to leave." Elizabeth's words caused the atmosphere in the cafe to drop a notch. A few nearby patrons turned their heads, curious about the exchange. Amelia set her menu down, her gaze losing some of its earlier tranquility. "Leave?" Amelia asked, her voice low but firm. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm just sitting here, waiting to order. Why do you think I need to leave?" Elizabeth faltered, the weight of onlookers' stares pressing heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't the one setting the rules, but the memory of Mason's stern words about acting decisively lingered, leaving her feeling like she couldn't afford another mistake. Amelia let out a faint, wry smile. "Safe for whom? For people like you? Or is it because I don't fit the image of a customer you expect?" Amelia's words hit Elizabeth like a jolt. She had no retort, but didn't want to back down either. Feeling the situation spiraling out of control, she turned toward the counter and called to Jack, "I think we need to call the police." Amelia remained seated, her expression calm but tinged with restrained anger. "Go ahead if you think that's the best course of action," she said, her voice cold but measured. Jack glanced at Elizabeth and then at Amelia, clearly sensing the thick tension enveloping the cafe. Without saying a word, he nodded slowly and picked up the phone. The atmosphere in the Sunrise Cafe grew increasingly tense as Amelia refused to comply with Elizabeth's request. Amelia's expression remained unchanged, her gaze calm yet piercing, enough to intensify the pressure Elizabeth felt mounting within her. "I'm not leaving," Amelia said, her voice low and resolute, each word carefully measured. "I'm just here for breakfast, nothing more. If you feel uncomfortable, that's your problem, not mine." Elizabeth froze. Amelia's firm yet polite response made her feel as if she was losing control of the situation. A flicker of uncertainty flashed in Elizabeth's eyes, but she was determined not to appear weak. Mason's reminders about ensuring the safety of all customers echoed in her mind. Elizabeth turned to glance at Jack, who was still standing at the coffee counter. Jack, usually a neutral observer, now sensed the situation was escalating beyond the point of casual oversight. He set aside the coffee he was brewing and walked over to Elizabeth. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice calm but tinged with caution. Elizabeth turned to him, speaking softly but loud enough for nearby customers to overhear. "She's refusing to tell me what's in the bag and won't leave. I think we need to call the police." Jack looked at Amelia, quickly assessing her with a neutral gaze. He appeared hesitant. "Is that necessary? I mean, she's just sitting here." Elizabeth frowned. "Jack, you know what happened the last time we ignored someone suspicious. We can't take that risk again." Jack sighed and said nothing more, stepping back to let Elizabeth handle the situation. Feeling emboldened by Jack's silence, Elizabeth pulled out her phone. "I'm sorry, but if you won't cooperate, I'll have to call the police. Elizabeth said, her voice trembling but determined. Amelia said nothing, her sharp gaze fixed on Elizabeth. "Go ahead, if you think that's the right thing to do," she replied, her tone cold yet composed. Elizabeth dialed the number, her voice tense but steady as she explained the situation. The cafe grew heavier with unease as customers began to take notice. Whispering voices rose across the room, some murmuring, "What's going on over there? Something about that woman. Is she causing trouble? She looks normal enough. Why are they suspicious of her?" The murmurs were like needles pricking the already stifling air. Amelia sat silently, but she could feel the weight of every stare directed at her. From an ordinary customer, she had suddenly become a disruptive presence, a potential threat, all because of her bag. Elizabeth, meanwhile, felt the mounting pressure not just from Amelia, but from the growing attention of the crowd. She didn't want to appear as the troublemaker in front of the customers, but the thought of ensuring the cafe's safety kept her from backing down. "Everything will be fine," Elizabeth told herself, though deep down she wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing. The cafe door suddenly swung open. A rush of cold air blew in, accompanying the quick steps of two police officers. Their eyes scanned the room, swiftly locating Elizabeth and Amelia. One of the officers stepped forward, his voice professional but clear. "We received a call about a disturbance. Who needs assistance here?" Elizabeth stepped forward quickly, her voice shaky but composed. "It's me. This woman. She's carrying a large bag and refused to cooperate when I asked about it. I just want to make sure everything here is safe." The officers turned to Amelia, their expressions guarded but laced with suspicion. Amelia slowly looked up, her gaze sharp and unafraid. "I'm not causing a disturbance," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I just want to eat breakfast. If my bag is an issue, then they should check everyone's bags in this cafe. Why am I the only one being questioned?" The tension in the cafe thickened to an almost unbearable level. All eyes remained fixed on Amelia and the officers, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. Amelia's last, piercing question lingered in the air as two police officers entered the Sunrise Cafe. Their presence immediately froze the atmosphere, and the murmurs of conversation fell silent. All eyes turned toward the entrance, where the two uniformed officers scanned the room with alert expressions. Officer Rachel, a tall woman with her hair neatly tied back and sharp eyes, led the way. Her partner, Officer Harris, followed closely, his hand lightly resting on his radio strap. Rachel quickly located Elizabeth, who stood near Amelia's table, visibly tense. Rachel approached, her voice professional but authoritative. "We received a call about a disturbance. Can someone explain what's going on here?" Elizabeth, feeling both relieved and nervous, stepped forward. "Yes, I'm the one who called," she said, her voice soft but clear. "This woman," she glanced at Amelia. "She has a large bag and refused to let me know what's inside. I just wanted to ensure everything here is safe for our customers." Rachel nodded and turned toward Amelia, her gaze landing on the travel bag beside Amelia's chair. "Ma'am, may we take a look at your bag? This is just to ensure there's nothing dangerous." Amelia, who had remained silent until now, looked up at Rachel. Her eyes reflected weariness but also unshakable resolve. "No," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "I do not consent." Rachel's brow furrowed slightly, but her expression remained professional. "You're refusing." Amelia nodded. "I am, unless you have a valid reason. I'm sitting here, trying to have breakfast. Nothing I've done gives you the right to suspect me or my bag." Rachel hesitated briefly, taken aback by Amelia's composure, but she quickly regained her authoritative stance. "Ma'am, we're just following protocol. If you cooperate, this can be resolved quickly." Amelia leaned forward slightly, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Protocol?" she asked, her voice low but carrying undeniable strength. "Is it your protocol to ask to search the bags of every customer in this cafe? Or just mine? I don't see you questioning anyone else here." Amelia's question fell into the room like a clap of thunder in an otherwise still sky. Rachel froze momentarily, her eyes flickering toward Harris, who remained standing silently behind her. Around them, other customers began exchanging glances, the tension and confusion spreading throughout the cafe. Elizabeth felt the weight of the customers' stares bearing down on her, making her discomfort grow. "We don't mean to offend," she attempted to explain, her voice trembling slightly. "But you have to understand, we need to be cautious, especially these days." Amelia turned her sharp gaze toward Elizabeth, her tone cutting through the space like a blade. "Cautious? I understand," she said, her voice growing colder. "What I don't understand is why caution only applies to me. You haven't asked anyone else here about their bags or belongings. So, what's the real issue here?" Rachel, sensing the growing tension and the weight of the silent but judgmental stares from other customers, tried to maintain control of the situation. "We don't intend to discriminate," she said, her tone softening. "It's just that we received a report, and we have to follow up." Amelia shook her head, a faint, bitter smile crossing her lips. "A report? About what? A woman sitting with a bag? If that's grounds for calling the police, then I'd say you're wasting your time." The cafe's atmosphere grew even more stifling. A few customers near Amelia subtly began recording the interaction on their phones, while others whispered among themselves, their faces marked with curiosity and unease. Rachel, though unwilling to admit it, felt cornered. Amelia's calm yet pointed demeanor made it increasingly difficult to wrap the situation up neatly. "Ma'am," Rachel began after a brief pause, "if you refuse to let us check your bag, we may have to escalate this matter. I strongly encourage you to cooperate." Amelia sighed, her eyes reflecting a mix of weariness and disappointment. "You can take me in," she said, her voice steady. "But that won't change the fact that you're treating me like a threat simply because I have a bag, and perhaps because I don't look like the people you usually see here." Rachel felt a sting of discomfort at the truth in Amelia's words, but kept her expression neutral. "I don't think we need to take it that far," she said, trying to de-escalate the tension. The confrontation hadn't yet reached its conclusion, but it had pushed everyone in the room to the edge of a delicate boundary between justice and prejudice. Amelia's sharp words weren't merely directed at Rachel, but at the unspoken assumptions quietly hanging in the air. The atmosphere in the Sunrise Cafe grew stifling after Amelia's words. Her sharp questions pierced like needles into the consciences of those standing before her. Officer Rachel, though maintaining an outwardly composed demeanor, could feel the weight of everyone's eyes around her. Elizabeth, the one who had initiated the entire incident, now showed visible signs of distress, her hands gripping the edges of her apron tightly, as if trying to steady herself. Amelia scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over each face, Elizabeth, Rachel, and the customers silently watching. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh, a breath laden with unspoken disappointment. "All right," she said, her voice calm but cold. "If you want to know, I'll show you." Amelia bent down and lifted the travel bag onto the table. Her hands, though showing fatigue from a long journey, carried the steadiness of someone who had weathered harsh trials. All eyes in the cafe followed her movements, the silence so intense it magnified the sound of the zipper as she slowly opened the bag. Inside, there was nothing but personal belongings, a few neatly folded clothes, a small toiletry bag, and an item carefully wrapped in a soft cloth. Amelia reached for the wrapped object and gently unfolded the layers, revealing an old picture frame. The frame contained a faded photograph, its colors worn but the image still clear. A group of young soldiers in uniform, standing together with resolute expressions. In the center stood Amelia, younger and smiling with pride. The silence in the cafe deepened. Elizabeth, Rachel, and Jack stared at the photograph, rendered speechless. The surrounding customers whispered among themselves, but no one dared break the solemnity of the moment. Amelia held the photograph in her hands, her gaze softening as she looked at the faces within it. "These are my comrades," she said, her voice steady yet tinged with deep pain. "They're the people I fought alongside, lived alongside, and faced things many here could never imagine." She placed the photograph on the table, her eyes never leaving it. "They're gone now," she continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I carry this picture with me so I don't forget why I lost them, and to remind myself that they fought for the values everyone here enjoys today." Rachel took a deep breath, the initial rigidity on her face giving way to a clear sense of remorse. "You served in the military," she said, her voice softer, almost a statement rather than a question. Amelia nodded. "Yes, I served. And now, upon my return, this is how I'm treated? All I wanted was breakfast, a moment of peace, and all I've received are suspicious glances and discrimination." Elizabeth, standing nearby, seemed frozen in place. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion and guilt. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice so faint it was nearly inaudible. "I didn't think." Amelia turned her gaze toward Elizabeth, not angry but powerful enough to make Elizabeth take a step back. "You're right. You didn't think," Amelia said, her voice soft yet heavy with meaning. "You didn't think before you acted, and now others bear the consequences." The room sank into a heavy silence. No one dared to speak. Everyone was captivated by the weight of the moment. Amelia's words were not only directed at Elizabeth but stood as a poignant reminder to everyone who had witnessed the scene. Rachel, after a few moments of quiet reflection, nodded slightly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice more genuine than ever. "This was a grave misunderstanding. There's nothing suspicious in your bag, and you have every right to be here." Amelia didn't reply immediately. She simply held Rachel's gaze for a moment before turning back to her bag. She carefully placed the photograph back inside, her movements slow and deliberate. As she zipped up the bag, the cafe remained engulfed in silence, as though everyone was reflecting on themselves through Amelia's story. This moment wasn't just the revelation of the truth. It was a powerful reminder of prejudice and the far-reaching consequences it could have. Amelia zipped her bag back up, but the heavy silence in the cafe lingered. The tension was far from dissipated, and all eyes remained fixed on Amelia, Elizabeth, and the police officers. Just then, another voice cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "What's going on here?" From behind the counter, Mason, the manager of Sunrise Cafe, stepped out with a strained smile. Dressed in a simple suit and neatly tied tie, he exuded a professional demeanor. His calm stride and deep, measured voice gave the impression that he would handle the situation swiftly. Before Mason could say more, however, an older man rose from a corner of the cafe. He moved closer, his eyes fixed on Amelia. "Amelia Carter," he said, his voice firm but tinged with emotion. "Is that you?" The entire room fell into a stunned silence. Amelia looked up, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Colonel Markwell?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. The man nodded and took another step forward. "Yes, it's me. I never expected to see you here. You were one of the bravest warriors I ever commanded." The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Customers, including Elizabeth and Mason, began to realize who the older man was. He wasn't just a regular patron, but Colonel Markwell, a renowned retired officer who had led several major military operations. "This woman," he said, turning to Elizabeth and Mason, "is not just a veteran. She saved my life and the lives of many of my comrades during one of the most dangerous campaigns in the Middle East. And this is how you treat her?" Mason stepped closer to the group surrounding Amelia's table, his strained smile still in place. Inside, however, his mind was racing. He couldn't forget the last time the cafe faced a disruption when a difficult customer caused chaos, leading to poor reviews on social media. Since then, the cafe's revenue had taken a hit, and Mason knew he couldn't afford another incident. For Mason, the cafe's image was everything. It wasn't just about securing his job, but also his pride. But now, as he looked into Amelia's resolute eyes, a conflict brewed within him. He couldn't let the cafe's reputation suffer, yet he also realized that continuing this course of action could harm a real person, not just a nameless customer. "I apologize for any inconvenience our customer may have experienced," Mason said, his tone smooth and carefully rehearsed. "I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding." Amelia looked up at Mason, her gaze unwavering. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice soft yet edged with challenge. Mason forced a thin smile, like a mechanic trying to tighten a loose screw. "Yes, exactly. I'm sure our employee, Elizabeth, was simply following our security protocols. This is all about ensuring the safety of our customers. Nothing personal." Elizabeth flinched at his words. Memories of a haunting evening a year ago flooded her mind. She had witnessed a stranger walk into the cafe with a similarly large bag. At first it seemed harmless, but a piercing noise from that bag soon turned the scene chaotic, with police and panic ensuing. Although no major harm had been done, the incident left Elizabeth with an indelible sense of fear. Since that day, every large bag triggered her unease. Moreover, Mason's constant reminders to stay vigilant amplified her anxiety. "We can't afford another incident," he had once said with a stern look that left her feeling like she was constantly on thin ice. Amelia wasn't letting up. "Security protocols," she echoed, her gaze boring into Mason. "Do those protocols involve suspecting anyone who doesn't look like your typical customer?" Mason cleared his throat, attempting to maintain his composure. "No, of course not," he said, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He realized his words weren't just directed at Elizabeth, but were also meant to shield himself from the judgment of those around them. Yet a small voice inside him questioned, "Am I doing the right thing? Or am I just covering up my mistakes with excuses?" Elizabeth stood frozen, her eyes widening as her breathing grew heavier. Mason's words, rather than offering reassurance, felt like a sharp blade pointed at her. The phrase she thought was right left her feeling as though she were being blamed for the entire ordeal. "But," Elizabeth stammered, her voice faltering as she looked at Mason, her expression clouded with confusion. "You told us to be alert about people with large bags or anyone suspicious." Mason turned to Elizabeth, lowering his voice as if to cut her off. "I think we need to focus on resolving the situation at hand, Elizabeth," he said, a cold smile flickering on his lips. Elizabeth fell silent, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her apron. A sense of betrayal began to well up inside her, but she dared not speak further. Amelia observed the exchange with cold, sharp eyes. She understood exactly what was happening. Mason wasn't truly apologizing. He was attempting to deflect responsibility by making Elizabeth the scapegoat while maintaining a facade of propriety in front of everyone else. "Interesting," Amelia said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You say this is a misunderstanding, but where did the misunderstanding start? Was it your cafe's policy or the assumptions of your staff?" Mason flinched at Amelia's direct question. His smile faltered momentarily before he recovered. "I understand your frustration, ma'am," he said, his tone still measured. "We will review our procedures to ensure no misunderstandings like this occur in the future." Amelia shook her head, a faint, bitter smile playing on her lips. "Procedures aren't the issue," she said. "The issue is how you and your staff perceive others. That's not something you can fix with a hollow apology." Amelia's words left Mason momentarily speechless. For a brief moment, everyone in the cafe seemed frozen, realizing that this incident wasn't merely a personal misunderstanding, but a profound lesson on prejudice and accountability. Elizabeth, standing quietly nearby, felt the weight of what had just transpired. She realized that not only had she made a mistake, but she had also been abandoned in a crisis she hadn't entirely caused. Mason might have tried to smooth over the situation, but his lack of sincerity and the contradictions in his words only made things worse, leaving a lingering unease among everyone present. The atmosphere in Sunrise Cafe remained thick with tension following Amelia's sharp words. Mason stood frozen, a strained smile on his face as he tried to maintain the illusion of control, though it was evident the situation had spiraled far beyond his grasp. Elizabeth, her head bowed and face pale, was overwhelmed by a mix of betrayal and shame. Amid the heavy silence, a voice rang out from the far corner of the cafe, strong and filled with indignation. "Enough!" Every eye turned toward the corner, where an older man with silver hair and a sturdy build rose from his seat. A silver badge, a symbol of military rank, gleamed on the chest of his jacket. He stepped forward, his gaze moving from Mason to Amelia. When his eyes landed on her, his expression changed, a flicker of recognition and emotion crossing his face. "Amelia Carter?" he asked, his deep voice steady but resonant. Amelia turned, her eyes widening briefly. "Colonel Ross," she said, her surprise unmistakable. The cafe murmured with curiosity. The man, now identified as Colonel Ross, nodded slowly. He turned to address everyone in the room, his voice commanding and firm. "This woman is a hero. I've witnessed firsthand her sacrifices, and those of her comrades to protect all of us in battles that not everyone would have the courage to face." He paused, his gaze settling on Elizabeth and Mason, who stood speechless. "Today, you have not only insulted her, but also dishonored the memory of every individual who gave their lives for this country." Colonel Ross swept his eyes across the room, the anger and disappointment in his expression unmistakable. Pointing to Amelia, he declared, "This woman does not deserve to endure this humiliation. If any of you truly understood the meaning of sacrifice, you would never treat her this way." A hushed stillness fell over the room. Colonel Ross stepped closer, his attention shifting to Mason and Elizabeth. "I'm a veteran, too," he said, his tone slow but laden with emotion. "I fought for this country and for the values we claim to uphold. What I see here today is a betrayal of those values." Mason swallowed hard, attempting a conciliatory smile. "Sir, we didn't mean to offend anyone. This was just a misunderstanding." The colonel cut him off, his voice razor-sharp. "Misunderstanding? No, this was not a misunderstanding. This was prejudice. This was judging someone based on appearances. And you think a hollow apology will fix this?" Elizabeth, her face flushing red, stepped back. The colonel's words struck her like a blow to the conscience. Amelia observed the exchange silently, her gaze showing a mix of surprise and empathy toward the colonel. At that moment, another customer near the window raised their phone. "I recorded everything," the customer announced, their voice resolute. "From the moment she walked into how you treated her." The statement was like a bomb detonating in the already fraught atmosphere. Mason whipped around, his eyes wide. "You can't do that," he said, his voice strained as he struggled to sound calm. "This is an internal matter. It doesn't need to be publicized." The customer didn't flinch, their eyes unwavering. "No, this isn't just an internal matter. This is about how people are treated. And the world needs to know." Elizabeth nearly collapsed under the weight of the revelation. She turned to Mason, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't have let it go this far. I was just following your instructions." Mason's tone turned icy as he responded. "This isn't the time to shift blame, Elizabeth." But everyone could see the cracks in his authority. The other customers' eyes were now fixed on Mason, their trust in him completely eroded. The colonel turned back to Amelia, offering her a slight nod, a silent pledge of solidarity. "They don't deserve your silence," he said, his voice low but resonant with meaning. Amelia smiled faintly, though her eyes reflected the weight of her memories. "I didn't expect to meet you under these circumstances," she said, her voice steady despite the underlying emotion. Colonel Ross shifted his sharp gaze back to Mason. "You don't understand what she has done for this country. And now, instead of showing her respect, you treat her with suspicion and prejudice." Mason, struggling to maintain composure, began to sweat. He knew the colonel's presence had escalated the situation beyond his control. Finally, Amelia spoke, her voice calm yet firm. "Thank you, Colonel. But I don't need anyone to defend my honor. What I need is for everyone here to realize that prejudice and behavior like this must change." The customer with the phone pressed a button and spoke decisively. "Don't worry. This story will spread." The unexpected intervention of the colonel and the determined action of the customer completely shifted the dynamic. Mason and Elizabeth could no longer avoid accountability. What began as an isolated incident was now poised to become a public outcry, bringing the consequences of prejudice to the forefront. The cafe doorbell chimed as Amelia stood up, pulling her bag along. She exited Sunrise Cafe in the weighty silence of gazes following her every step. The older man nodded to her one last time, and a nearby patron, still holding their phone, assured her, "We'll get to the bottom of this." That day, Amelia returned home with a heavy heart. She couldn't stop thinking about the injustice she had experienced, not just toward herself, but toward the values she had sacrificed to protect. After much contemplation, she decided that silence was not the answer. Sitting in front of her computer, Amelia began typing a social media post. She recounted in detail what had happened at Sunrise Cafe, expressing her feelings of disappointment, pain, and the ramifications of judging others based on appearances. The post, while not written in anger, was a powerful call for change. "People like us," she wrote, "who have given our youth and lives for this country should not be treated as threats just because we don't fit someone's expectations." Her story spread rapidly. Within hours, the post garnered thousands of shares. Others, including many veterans, began sharing similar experiences, turning Amelia's story into a symbol of a larger societal issue. The media quickly picked up the story. Local TV stations reported on it, and online articles with headlines such as "Veteran Faces Discrimination at Sunrise Cafe" surfaced. Photos of Amelia, along with an image of her in uniform, were widely circulated, accompanied by strong criticism of the cafe and its staff's handling of the situation. Sunrise Cafe found itself at the center of a public storm. Critical calls and emails poured in, with many customers vowing to boycott the cafe until concrete action and an apology were made. The staff, particularly Elizabeth, felt the inevitable strain of the backlash. Mason, the cafe's manager, was also under fire. The criticism wasn't just directed at the staff's behavior, but also at his lack of genuine accountability when attempting to downplay the incident instead of addressing it directly. Under growing pressure, Mason was forced to hold a press conference. Standing before the media's cameras, his face visibly strained, he read a public statement. "We sincerely apologize to Ms. Amelia Carter and the veteran community for the unfortunate incident at our cafe," Mason began. "This event highlights failures in our management and training. We are committed to improving to ensure incidents like this never happen again." He went on to announce that all Sunrise Cafe employees would undergo training on customer relations, particularly focusing on vulnerable groups. Additionally, the cafe pledged a substantial donation to a veteran support organization to make amends. However, Mason's apology didn't immediately quell public outrage. Many questioned his sincerity, arguing that the cafe's actions seemed more aimed at damage control than genuine reform. Meanwhile, Elizabeth bore the brunt of the backlash from both the public and her conscience. She received numerous criticisms, some even threatening in nature, from those who followed the story. Guilt weighed heavily on her, forcing her to confront her actions and her role in the incident. Elizabeth wrote a handwritten letter to Amelia expressing profound remorse. In the letter, she admitted to acting out of prejudice and fear and pledged to do everything in her power to become a better person. The Sunrise Cafe incident extended beyond apologies and donations. It became a wake-up call, sparking broader conversations about the fair treatment of veterans and the urgent need to dismantle societal biases. Amelia, though not seeking attention, became a symbol of resilience and courage. Her story demonstrated that sometimes one person standing up for what's right can inspire change in an entire community. Sunrise Cafe learned a bitter lesson, but whether they truly changed remained to be seen, a question only time could answer. After the tumultuous days following the incident at Sunrise Cafe, the story continued to resonate deeply. Amelia, though unwillingly, became the center of attention and a source of inspiration for many. Meanwhile, those directly involved, Elizabeth and Mason, faced the consequences of their actions, compelling them to reflect and change. Elizabeth, who had initiated the incident, felt immense pressure from all sides. Not only was she criticized publicly, but she also faced dissatisfaction from her co-workers and the gnawing guilt within herself. She realized that she had let fear and prejudice cloud her judgment, leading to her unfair treatment of Amelia. On a quiet evening, Elizabeth decided to write a letter to Amelia. Sitting down with a blank sheet of paper, her trembling hand picked up the pen. Slowly and sincerely, she began to write. "Dear Ms. Carter, I would like to extend my deepest apologies to you. I acted foolishly and wrongly. I didn't think about your feelings or the consequences of my actions. I allowed baseless fears to dictate my behavior and judged you solely by appearances. You didn't deserve that." Elizabeth went on to share how the incident had made her reevaluate herself and taught her an important lesson. She ended the letter with a promise to never let prejudice cloud her judgment again. After sending the letter, Elizabeth felt as though a weight had been partially lifted. Yet she understood that an apology alone was not enough to erase her mistake. She began participating in training programs organized by the cafe and committed herself to becoming a more responsible and empathetic employee. Mason, too, couldn't escape the repercussions of the event. His public apology helped ease some of the backlash, but he knew he needed to do more to regain the trust of both customers and employees. He spent time reviewing the cafe's management policies and operating procedures. Mason realized that vague directives about ensuring security had inadvertently fostered an environment that encouraged suspicion and unfair judgment. "We need to change," Mason said during a staff meeting, "not because of public pressure, but because it's the right thing to do. From now on, I want this cafe to be a place where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are or what they look like." He announced mandatory training sessions for all staff on recognizing biases and handling situations professionally. Additionally, Mason pledged to hold regular dialogue sessions to hear feedback from both employees and customers, ensuring that issues would be addressed fairly and transparently. To reinforce his commitment, Mason partnered the cafe with a local veterans organization. Sunrise Cafe would sponsor free meals for veterans once a month and host fundraising events to support their needs. Mason and Elizabeth's efforts began to show results. Though some customers were initially skeptical, they gradually returned, impressed by the cafe's transparency and commitment to change. Many praised the cafe for taking tangible steps toward improvement. When Amelia received Elizabeth's apology letter and learned about the changes being implemented at Sunrise Cafe, she felt a sense of relief. She had never sought revenge or punishment. She only wanted the incident to serve as a lesson for everyone involved. And now, she felt that goal had been partially achieved. In response, Amelia sent a letter back to Elizabeth, brief but meaningful. "Thank you for your apology. Forgiveness is not the most important thing. True change is. I hope you continue to honor that commitment." The incident at Sunrise Cafe was not just an isolated event, but a powerful reminder of the strength of change when we confront our mistakes. Elizabeth learned to view others with fairness and respect. Mason understood that being a manager was not just about running a business, but also about fostering a positive and humane culture. Sunrise Cafe, now transformed, became more than just a diner. It stood as a symbol of redemption and hope, a place where everyone was treated with the dignity they deserved. The changes at Sunrise Cafe weren't just lip service. Mason understood that to rebuild trust with the customers and the community, he needed to take substantial action. That's why he decided to organize a special charity event, a breakfast dedicated to veterans, with all proceeds going to a support organization for them. On the day of the event, the atmosphere at Sunrise Cafe was a mix of excitement and solemnity. The tables were carefully arranged, and a large banner hung at the entrance reading, "Thank you to those who served our country." Amelia received an invitation from Mason along with a handwritten letter from Elizabeth asking her to attend the event. Initially, she hesitated. Returning to the place that had caused her so much pain wasn't an easy decision. But after some thought, Amelia realized that this was an opportunity to close a tense chapter and emphasize the importance of genuine change. When Amelia stepped into the cafe, all eyes turned to her. Those present, including other veterans, regular customers, and supporters of her story, greeted her with warm applause. Mason approached her, his smile more genuine than it had ever been. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice tinged with nervousness and gratitude. Amelia nodded slightly. "I'm not here for more apologies," she replied. "I'm here to see real change." During the event, Mason invited Amelia to speak. She stood before a crowded room, her gaze steady and unwavering. She recounted her story, not shying away from the painful details of what she had endured at the cafe. "I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty," she began, her voice firm. I'm here to remind us all that change is necessary, and it starts with treating one another with respect and understanding." She paused, letting her words sink in, her eyes scanning the audience. We can't know someone's story just by looking at them, but we can always choose to respond with kindness. The room erupted into applause when Amelia concluded her speech. A few attendees stood to express their support, not just for her, but also for the powerful message she delivered. After her speech, Elizabeth approached Amelia. She had prepared a few words of gratitude, but when she stood in front of her, she could only manage a simple, "Thank you for giving me a chance to make things right." Amelia looked at Elizabeth, her expression softening. "A chance isn't something I give you," she said. "It's something you give yourself." The event was more successful than anyone had anticipated, attracting people from the local community and veterans alike. All proceeds were donated to a veteran support organization, a tangible sign that the cafe had learned a valuable lesson and was striving to contribute to positive change. When Amelia left Sunrise Cafe that day, it was with a different feeling than the last time. Yet her story didn't end there. A week after the charity event, Amelia received an unexpected invitation from a nonprofit organization focused on social equity. They asked her to be the keynote speaker at a conference about dismantling bias and honoring veterans. Initially hesitant, Amelia realized her story could make a greater impact. At the conference, she stood before hundreds of attendees, including community leaders, educators, and even individuals who, like Elizabeth, had held biases in the past. "I'm not someone who seeks attention," Amelia began, her steady gaze sweeping across the room. "But I've learned that silence isn't the answer. We can't change anything if we're not willing to confront it. Bias doesn't just harm individuals, it weakens entire communities." Her speech received a standing ovation. After the event, several people approached her to express gratitude for sharing her story, some admitting that it had changed their perspectives on others. Mason, watching Amelia as she left the cafe after the charity event, committed to implementing the changes he had promised. He organized in-depth bias awareness training for all staff members, including himself. Elizabeth, who had learned a profound lesson, didn't stop at just apologizing. She volunteered with a local veteran support organization, frequently participating in outreach programs and helping organize community events to bridge the gap between veterans and civilians. One day, Amelia received a card from Elizabeth. It read, "Dear Ms. Carter, thank you for teaching me the most important lesson, that we can change as long as we're willing to face our mistakes." Amelia smiled as she read the card. She knew that even a small action could create a ripple of meaningful change. Sunrise Cafe, once a small eatery overshadowed by a big mistake, had become a symbol of redemption and progress. Amelia's story didn't just change the cafe, it reshaped how the community viewed bias and fair treatment. Her journey didn't end with a charity breakfast. It continued in conversations, lessons, and shifts in how people treated one another. Every change starts with a small action. Always remember, kindness is never wasted. The story of Amelia Carter is not just a reminder of the consequences of bias, but a testament to the power of resilience and courage. From a painful experience, she turned it into a catalyst for change, impacting not just a cafe, but an entire community. What do you think of the way Sunrise Cafe handled the situation and the lessons they learned? Do you believe these changes are enough to atone for their initial mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to spread its message and stay updated on more inspiring stories.